Welcome to today's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. I just need to let everybody know that the live stream is going on social media. Okay. Everybody now knows that the live stream is going on, so I'm going to get everything started. And the live stream today is going to be about the psychological ghetto. Now, this live stream was inspired by Ringo, also known as Black Male Advice TV. I urge you to go check out his channel. There's a lot of good information on there, and he talks a lot about men's issues, and he also talks about the gospel of the Most High. So I urge you to go check his channel out. But this live stream was inspired by his, which was a very good live stream where he talked about how the ghetto is a psychological place. Now, this was something I learned way back in my early 20s, back when I was writing my first book, The Changing Soul. Now, The Changing Soul was the first book I wrote featuring the John Haynes character. And that story was all about how the John Haynes character came to understand that the ghetto he grew up in wasn't a physical place, it was a psychological place. And it was all about the efforts he made to first leave that psychological ghetto as he was making steps to move out of the ghetto after he got a new job. And that story was the one where I started to understand about how the ghetto isn't a physical place, it is a psychological place. And it is a mindset and frame of thinking that winds up hindering most Black people from actualizing their potential and becoming the people God wants them to be. That's the big problem with most Black people, is that when they get into the whole ghetto mindset, is they no longer see God as their center. Instead, they place other gods in front of them. And the one God that most Black people place in front of them is this white man. And the second God that Black people place in front of him are his institutions that are like the welfare state, such as welfare, food stamps, WIC, Section 8, and these government programs. These government programs become a god to Black people who have a ghetto mindset, and they place those institutions above themselves because they believe they need these institutions in order to survive. So for them, they are living to be in this ghetto environment. And that the whole mindset starts with this whole dependence that they believe they need to have on the government and the government programs. That's how you start getting this into the psychological ghetto, is you start growing up believing you need dependence on these programs. Because as a kid who grew up on welfare and grew up in Section 8 housing, I saw this ghetto mindset start at an early age, and I saw people grow up believing in this ghetto mindset where they learned how to just be dependent on these government programs and be afraid of this welfare state taking things away from them, like that Section 8 housing or those welfare benefits. Because when it comes down to people who are caught up in the psychological ghetto, they primarily believe that they need to be in this place in order to survive. And if they leave this place, then something is wrong with them. So basically, your welfare state is like slavery, except the slaves are staying on the plantation because they want to stay on the plantation, and they believe that if they don't leave, if they leave the plantation, something is wrong with them, and that's how they are in this psychological ghetto right now. This is a ghetto. The ghetto is basically like a slave plantation, and the slaves, sadly, still believe that they need to be on the plantation or else they will die. So that's the core foundation of your psychological ghetto, and why so many Black people will stay in that ghetto even if they get the tools and the resources to move their lives forward. So you can take this person out of the ghetto, but the whole thing is that the mindset that they have keeps them in a ghetto, whether they have $1 or $1 billion. The whole thing is their frame of thinking is the thing that keeps them in the ghetto, because you can take one of these individuals who have this psychological ghetto inside of their mind. You could take them and take them to a nice neighborhood, and they will still participate in the same dysfunctional behaviors that they participated in the ghetto. So you can take this guy who comes from the ghetto, who has grown up on welfare, grown up on food stamps, and you can take this individual, move him out of the ghetto. And what will happen to this individual is he will start playing his radio loud. He will be smoking joints. He will even participate in the same habits, like standing outside of his building, out of his condo or co-op, and he will be standing outside even though he has no place to go, because these are the habits he has learned in that dysfunctional environment known as the ghetto. And what will happen is you cannot change this person because this is the way they have been raised. And unless you have a spiritual intervention from the living God, this person will continue participating in this dysfunctional behavior. So it's not a physical place that the ghetto is, it is a psychological place, and it is a place people learn how to live because of the culture they are taught in poverty. Because that's the whole thing that people have to understand. The welfare state was created to not only to keep the Black man out of the household, but it was also created to condition a frame of thinking and mindset inside of the Black woman. And that's what's happened how we got our modern day ghetto, because your Black woman learned how to be dependent on the government and the welfare state. And she learned how to teach that culture to her daughters and her sons over the last 50 years. And as those daughters and sons learned that culture from her, that is how we got our modern day ghetto. Not a physical place, but a psychological place, because how a person thinks is how a person perceives the world around them, And if a person has dysfunctional thinking, they are going to turn any environment into a ghetto. And this is why I can agree with your David Carroll when he says that Blackistan comes from the black woman, because when it comes down to your modern day black woman who embraced the feminist movement and embraced the welfare state, she is the one who takes Blackistan wherever she goes, and wherever her children of the corn go, they take Blackistan with them. And when you hear people talking about how they're going to move from one neighborhood and then to another neighborhood, the reason why those neighborhoods turn into ghettos is because those individuals' perceptions, frameworks of thinking, and mindset turn that neighborhood into a ghetto. Now, I remember when YouTuber Dan Freeman, many years ago, it's about 10 years ago, he talked about it in a video, I believe it's called The Threatening Black Man, where he talked about how parts of Memphis, where Graceland was, they decided to let Section 8 people come into the neighborhood. And all of a sudden, this nice middle class area was quickly turned into a ghetto because of these individuals and their dysfunctional behavior. And the reason why that happened was because of the frame of thinking that these people had. Most of these people who came into the neighborhood, they were not thinking about coming into this nice neighborhood in order to maintain the standards of that neighborhood, nor were they thinking about building anything in that neighborhood. So because of their mental state, they turned this nice middle class neighborhood into a complete ghetto filled with dysfunctional people standing outside of the buildings, people drinking beers, people smoking weed, a bunch of guys hanging out all hours of the night, and dysfunctional black males or going out there and going and standing in front of an Arab-owned store at 6 o'clock in the morning all the way until midnight instead of going to work. All of that happened because, not because of the people, but because of their whole frame of thinking and their completely dysfunctional mindset. So the ghetto is not a physical place, it is a psychological place, because if I took the same neighborhood and same property and I gave it to a group of black people who were thinking like functional adults, they would turn that exact same area into a clean middle class neighborhood. If I took some working class brothers and sisters and I put them in the exact same neighborhood, they would turn that property into top level real estate. And the reason why they would turn that into top quality real estate is because they would have a vision for their community. They would set a direction for their community, and they would establish standards for their community, because as working class individuals, they would want to make sure that their community is top quality and that there would be a quality of life for everyone in that community. That's what happens when you have people with a functional and healthy mindset. When they move into a neighborhood, the first couple of things they want to do is establish community standards. They want those standards in place because they want everybody to live the same quality of life. They want to make sure that their neighborhood is safe, and they want to make sure that everybody is able to have a certain level of quality of life for themselves and for their children. Moreover, they're going to teach that culture of quality of life and standards to their kids because they value what they worked for, they value what they built, and they value what they own. Because that's the other thing that's a part of the ghetto mindset, is nobody values anything because nobody owns anything in the ghetto. When it comes down to the ghetto, Black people's mindset is this is not theirs, so they have no connection to anything, no sense of ownership. And because they have no sense of ownership, They don't value anything and they don't value anyone because they don't value their own lives, because they don't see themselves as people. They just see themselves as property of the state, and they believe that they're getting their needs met by the welfare state. That is the main reason why people are in the psychological ghetto, because they don't see themselves as valuable as people. They have no sense of self-worth, no sense of self-esteem, no sense of self-love. And that's why your people who have a ghetto mindset can destroy the lives of others, because they don't see a value to their own lives. So that's the main reason why you will see so many people who live in the ghetto having this crab in a bucket mentality, because they don't see a value to their lives, so they don't see a value to your life. And when they see another black man going out here or black woman going out here trying to do things, this is why they will try to cut another black person down, because they don't see that person's life as having value. And if that person is trying to do something, they fear that they're going to get above them. Moreover, they fear that they may try to disrupt their ability to get resources from the state. It's like I stated in the previous live stream, the other reason why a lot of people want to stay in the ghetto has to do with the economic system, because the welfare state is the thing that is providing them with the allocation of resources, because economic systems are how resources are allocated, and they don't want anybody to come in and disrupt the allocation of those resources. And that's why people who aspire to do things like get straight A's in school, or people who want to go out here and aspire to have careers, these people are seen as enemies of the state and enemies of the state institutions, whether it be the welfare state or the enforcers of the welfare state, your black single mothers and your gangbangers, who basically are like the law enforcement of these areas, enforcing the policies of white supremacy. And looks like we have a troll here. They can't stand hearing the raw truths that I'm putting in. So we got one of these Nazi guys coming in here. And these gang members, they are basically enemies of the state. They see black men who are trying to do something with their lives as enemies of the state. And what they want to do is go out here and eliminate those enemies of the gynocentric state before they can disrupt the economic system. And this is why they have a serious issue with any sort of working class brother or aspiring working class brother, because they are a threat to the gynocentric state. And the other thing you have to understand about the ghetto is, again, it is a gynocentric state. And that gynocentric state is run by the female leadership. And the female, looks like we got a troll. I wish I could get another mod in here. One of these Russian trolls coming in here. But I'm going to get back to my points about this welfare state being gynocentric. And the whole thing is that ghetto mindset is protected because the males who come from the single mother households, they are looking to protect their way of being taken care of. So that's why they will go out here and eliminate but they look to eliminate any sort of black man who comes in because they fear black male authority. Because what black male authority will do in a ghetto environment is they will try to assert male authority, and they will try to be the leader of the community. However, what the beta males want to do is eliminate that man. Okay, you can volunteer to mod. I will. So I need to get this troll out of here. This Russian troll is looking to start trouble. But what they want to do is eliminate any sort of black male leadership whatsoever, because in the psychological ghetto, these slaves think that if they don't get their economic needs met by the women, what will happen is everything that they have will fall apart. Even worse, the women in the community may start demanding that those black men, they will start demanding that those black males step up to do the work of black men. And that's the other thing that has a lot of these black males upset in the ghetto, because when it comes down to the psychological ghetto, a lot of these males, they want to remain dependent on the female. And the whole thing with the psychological ghetto is it starts with this black woman. It starts with her. And the reason why white supremacists wanted it to start with her is, again, they understood that the black woman is the first teacher of culture. And as this woman goes, so goes the direction of the black community. So they wanted the black woman to go out here and be a part of that feminist movement and then buy into this welfare state, because what your black woman thought she was getting was an opportunity to be like this white woman. They thought they could be just like the white female. However, what happened was there was an okie doke being placed on the white female, not the white female, the black female, because the white man, what he did was have the woman buy into feminism, not understanding that many of the founders of feminism were lesbians, and most of those feminists wanted to be like white men. And your feminist mindset is one that is destructive to women, because it's not about building, it's about dominance and control. And that dominance and control was also a necessary part of the welfare state, because she's got to be dominant over the community in order to control the community. That power, which was given to her by these white supremacists and liberals who created the welfare state, and created the welfare state so that the female could control things and have control over the community. So with that woman in charge, they had the foundations for the mindset. And if the man is taken out of the home, they could control the overall community by having control over the woman, because the woman would be the one who would go out here and be dependent on the welfare state instead of the white man. And then she would teach her children to also be dependent on the welfare state as well. And that's how we got the creation of your modern day ghetto, and we got the creation of the whole ghetto mindset. And the ghetto mindset is something that people learn out of being dependent, and they learn from their mothers about all of society. And that culture is a culture of fear. And that's the other core foundation of the psychological ghetto, is it's Black women learning how to be afraid. And as they learn how to be afraid of the government, they then teach their children how to be afraid of the government and the welfare state. And they teach them to not try to challenge the welfare state in any way, shape, or form. And this culture is taught in many inner city neighborhoods by people when they go out here for certain things. I remember as a kid, you couldn't talk about certain things as related to welfare because we were afraid that welfare was going to find out and take things from you. And it was the little things that they did, like having back in the 70s and the early 80s, they would have these welfare case managers come out to people's houses. That was a way of getting control over the Black woman and keeping her afraid and teaching her children to be afraid of going out to try to go out and achieve and accomplish anything out of fear of offending the welfare state or losing the benefits of the welfare state. So that's what they did with the Black woman. That's the start of the ghetto mindset, is these people are taught to be so afraid of offending the people in charge of the welfare state that they don't go out here and try to actualize their potential. So they're more afraid of losing their benefits that they don't go out here and take any risks in life. And that's how the welfare state keeps mental control over many Black people, is they tell them, oh, if you go out here and do anything, you have to tell us, and we have to know about everything. And what they do with that is passive aggressively control an individual, because it's like passively you have to tell them, but then aggressively what they do is take actions to keep you from moving forward. Because I've seen that done whenever you try to get any sort of job. These welfare and Section 8 people will talk about how they need to have the letter from this corporation. They need phone numbers of the supervisor. And again, this is passive aggressive stuff meant to keep you dependent. And the great irony is the welfare state will sit there and tell you that they want to help you get efforts to become independent. However, they don't really want you to become independent, because if you become independent, what will happen is you are going to represent competition for these people. And if enough people get off the welfare state, what's going to happen is those people are going to go get jobs. And that means we won't need any more welfare states. So what they want to do is keep you mentally on this plantation, which is the ghetto, so they can continue making money off you. And they make money off you at your expense, so they can keep you in a second-class lifestyle, so that they can enrich themselves through things like block grants and tax dollars. So what they do is they use you to make money for themselves, and you wind up losing your life and your potential because you have been taught to fear the welfare state, which is the foundation of the psychological ghetto. So that's the foundation of the psychological ghetto, is that fear. And I grew up with that fear for years, learning that, okay, you can't do much unless you either tell these welfare people, or if they find out about something, they may punish you by taking away your mother's benefits, or they may even threaten to put you out of their housing, all because you want to go out here and do something without their say so. And that's something that most people who don't live in the ghetto have to live with. They can go out here, and if they want to go to school, they can go to school. If they want to go to work, they can go to work. But people who live in the ghetto, they live in a fear that if they do these things, their entire life can be put in jeopardy by these people who run the welfare state, and they can lose everything And that type of psychological conditioning is why many people, even though they will go out here and get multiple college degrees, like bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs, they will still remain in the ghetto. And again, that ghetto is not a physical place, it is a psychological place. And even if these people go out here and get their educations and even get their big corporate jobs, what will happen is they will take that ghetto mindset right with them, and they will never really actualize that potential. And we can see that with many of these Black women out here who go out and get these master's degrees, these PhDs. What will happen is they will still be acting ghetto on these jobs, and they will be out here with the neck rolling and the eye rolling and the attitude. These are all habits they learned in the psychological ghetto, and they will still be out here with Pookie and Ray Ray, even though they are making $85,000, $90,000 a year. They're still out here with Pookie and Ray Ray and not thinking about moving themselves forward and getting with a man who has standards because they fear standards. It's another thing about the psychological ghetto is you're taught to fear standards outside of the welfare state because you were raised to only think of the welfare state as the only place that had the standards. So the only standards you thought about having were making sure that your papers were in place for the recertification or anything that's related to that. You were never taught you have to have a standard for your home. You have to have a standard for your life because the state controlled your life. And that's another part of the psychological ghetto. And that's why many people who have the ghetto mentality, again, don't care about their neighborhoods because the state does everything for them. And they never learn how to go out here and do for self because they're used to being dependent on the state, whether it be in the Section 8 housing or the wealth or the buildings that are run by welfare, like the projects. They're used to other people doing things and never doing anything for themselves. So that's something else that is another part of the welfare state is people never learn how to do for self because they're used to the government doing for them. And Black women want that because they really don't want any responsibility whatsoever. So as long as the government is doing for them, they don't have to do for themselves. So this welfare, this psychological ghetto, this is a mindset that can really destroy your life if you don't really become aware of it as Black people, because you will just sit there and you will never think to actualize your potential. You will never think to aspire to do better than others or better than what other people are telling you. And you will have low expectations of yourself because you've been taught, oh, you're a poor kid from the ghetto. You can't do any better, but you can do better. And that's something that they don't want you to do because they want you to remain at the bottom so that people can make money at your expense. And that, again, that's all part of that whole psychological conditioning because the only way the welfare state can continue to perpetuate itself is if you have bodies continuing to reproduce babies that are a part of it. And that's another thing people don't understand about the psychological ghetto is that once you teach that culture from one generation to the next, that means you can get one group of people to go out here and produce more children. And that's how we got from the original generation of the welfare state to the baby mamas of the 1980s to the dysfunctional Black folks we have living in ghettos right now. It's a generational process, and it was socially engineered to be a generational process because they understood that once you get this Black woman's mind, then you can have not only her child, but her children's children, and you can have people being dysfunctional from generation to generation. And that's how the psychological ghetto is passed on because the mothers pass that culture on from one generation to the next. So that's how the psychological ghetto works. But the whole foundation of the ghetto, again, starts with the Black woman. And the reason why they did that is because most Black women wanted economic security, and they feared that if they stayed with this Black man, they would not have economic security. And that what happened was the liberal understood this, and that's why he said he didn't want the father in the home, because if there was no father in the home, that meant that the children would not be taught a culture under God's natural order. Because under the culture of God's natural order, children learn how to respect male authority. They learn how to respect male figures. They learn how to respect male leadership, and they learn how to see men as valuable. And in the psychological ghetto, men are not taught to see a value in manhood because they hear this whole culture of Black men being no good, Black men being lazy, Black men being incompetent. And that's the culture that is taught in the psychological ghetto to young Black males. And that's what leads to young Black males creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where they are told they are no good, then they actually go out here and go on the pipeline to prison because somebody taught them, their mothers taught them by saying negative things about Black men. Black men are no good, Black men are dogs, Black men are this. All this stuff is all part of the mental conditioning which keeps Black boys believing these ideas that they are no good, and then they go out here and head down the prison pipeline, and that's what happens to a lot of these brothers. Rapper 10,000 asks, is the psychological ghetto also from the music? It all comes from that foundation of that Black woman. That music you hear is a reflection of how he sees himself, and how he sees himself is from what his mother taught him. So when you listen to this gangster rap and this thug culture, all of that comes from that whole foundation of the psychological ghetto, because whatever art, literature, and culture you see from this Black male that he produces comes from his frame of thinking, and the entire neighborhood is based on his frame of thinking, because this is what happens when people think a certain way. So when you look at the ghetto, it is a place that is created from people's thinking. And because if you gave these same neighborhoods to people, they would turn it into a reflection of their imagination and their perception of the world. And we see that example happening in parts of Brooklyn here in New York, and even parts of Harlem where they are so-called gentrifying the neighborhood. We see when these white people come into these exact same neighborhoods, they turn these neighborhoods into middle-class neighborhoods and upscale neighborhoods. And that's all due to their perception of self and their perception of their surroundings. They have a vision for what they want to turn their neighborhoods into, and they believe that they can go out here and do this with or without resources. But when it comes down to Black people, we don't have that vision or imagination in a lot of cases due to the frame of thinking we have been raised and conditioned to believe about ourselves. And because we have been raised and conditioned to believe that we are not valuable and that we have no worth, what is happening is that's why you have a ghetto, and that's why you have people who believe they can't leave that ghetto. But the truth is you can leave that ghetto anytime you want, but it's about getting your mind right in order to leave in the first place. Because once you get your mind right, then your body can leave. And that's what I wrote about many years ago when I wrote the first John Haynes book, The Changing Soul, is that the John Haynes character came to the point where he said that, this place in life, I'm going nowhere. and it's time for me to leave. And the thing that got him to leave was seeing the environment he was in was toxic, the people he was around were toxic, and he had started making plans to leave that environment to go be in a more positive environment, more around more positive people. And when you do that, that's when you can start making efforts to leave the ghetto. And that's why I made the live stream where I talked about once a black man gets success, he has to leave the ghetto, because when it comes down to the successful black man, there is no place for him in the ghetto, because the ghetto, as being a psychological institution of the mind, is also reinforced by the policies of the welfare state, which were never designed to keep black men as a part of it. Black men were never a part of the original ghetto economic model. The original ghetto economic model was created by white liberals to get resources from the government by exploiting black women. So the welfare state had nothing to do with black men, because they did not want black fathers in the home of the welfare state, because black fathers were considered a threat to the welfare state. One, because if black men had control over the money, they could also have control over the community, and they could also have control over the resources in the community. Oh, good morning, Chris. Chris Brown is the writer of Omega Black, great black manga. I'm hoping you picked that up on Amazon along with my books. But he makes a great manga called Omega Black, and I'm glad to have him here. Smiley Man, glad to have you here. And Benny and Kitty Candy, wrestling superstar, Nightingale, Wednesday Nightmare, glad to have you here. Supremo, Acune. Glad to see you all you guys here for the live stream. But they don't want black, and D Woodward, they don't want black men to control the community, because if black men control the community, they will control the resources in the community, and they will have their own economy. And the whole thing with the black economy was that it wasn't very stable because of the racism black men endured, because when it came down to black men before the civil rights movement, black males couldn't get good jobs because racists kept black men out of those jobs. And the only jobs black men could usually get were things like janitor, parking attendant. But a lot of black men, they built middle-class lifestyles out of the jobs they could get. But the whole thing is their jobs were very unstable. And black women, understanding that their jobs were unstable, they stayed with those black men at the time. But the feminist movement, it came to those black women telling them they could be like white women, and they believed they could be a part of the welfare state. They could get the benefits to move up in the middle class. And what happened was they joined the welfare state in the hopes of moving up. And what happened was it was a huge step down. It was actually not a step up, because when you're in the welfare state, what happens is you wind up becoming part of a permanent underclass and not part of a middle class. And that's where black women fell into a trap, was they thought, oh, I'll get this welfare. But the whole thing is they wanted to get the black woman as part of the welfare state to get into her mind, and also teach that, again, that culture to her children, so they would believe that the ghetto was the only place for them. And that's why we have a lot of these people in the psychological ghetto right now. And that psychological ghetto is the place that keeps black people at the bottom, because they are primarily dependent on this system, and not thinking about going out here to actualize their own potential, because the state will not allow you to actualize your potential. And then the culture you learn will also keep you from actualizing your potential, because in the welfare state, you have people who just sit there and think about, they're not thinking about going out to do anything, because in their minds, if you go out here and try to go to school, or you try to go out here and get work, those are considered quote unquote white things. And I have to ask a critical question. How is that a white thing going out here? And what makes being white bad? I mean, the great irony is that most of the black women who wanted to become a part of the welfare state in the 60s, they wanted to be like white women. But then you have the children who were taught that doing things that will help them move ahead, these are considered white things and considered bad. And that's considered that's the way you have the real mental dysfunction there. They're trying to be like this quote unquote real black person, and they believe that being a quote unquote real black person is a person who does not work, a person who sits on the street all day, and a person who sits there and participates in dysfunctional behaviors like playing the radio loud or getting into beefs with other people in their buildings or forming things like gangs. And that's how deeply psychologically damaged many of these black folks are in this psychological ghetto. They're thinking that these habits and behaviors are the quote unquote real black behaviors, when in actuality, real black has always been associated with excellence and always been associated with going out here and doing for self. So a lot of black people are getting a miseducation when they live in the psychological ghetto. They have this notion that these ideas that they were told were black are black, when in actuality, these are stereotype ideas that are fed to them inside of mainstream media. And this is another thing that keeps black people in the psychological ghetto, is they will sit there and they will imbibe this media that features black images and believe them to be black, like the pimps in the 70s or the thugs in the 90s. They will sit there, imbibe this media, and believe that it's real, when in actuality, that media is no real depiction of black life. It is a stereotype designed to get you to become conditioned and believe that this is what a black person is. And it's not true at all. The true reality of black people was what we were getting with what Bill Cosby was producing, what Robert Townsend was producing back in the 80s, and the Hudlin brothers. They were trying to give us balanced images of black life. But what they wanted to do was hijack the narrative so that we could see those negative images and see these images of black life that were filled with stereotypes. And again, that's all part of psychological conditioning, because if you look at a lot of the media, like a lot of the stuff out here, like Oprah Winfrey's, the Ricky Lakes, and these talk shows, again, they wanted to create those negative images and create that self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's get those likes up. We got 69 people watching. Let's get the likes up, because that's how we can get better placed in the algorithm. So if everybody wants to get the likes up, we can get up to 100. Last week we got it up to 120, and I really appreciate that, because it really gets people to more notice the streams and be with the streams. And I'm reading Rapper 10,000. He says that pro-blacks on YouTube call for us to speak for ourselves. That we're not educated lambs. We just become aware of the psychological ghetto. The Pookies and the Ray Rays, they have been brainwashed to believe in the rhetoric of the ghetto, and they've been conditioned to believe that the ghetto is that the ghetto is a real place, when in actuality, the ghetto is a matrix designed to keep you contained so that you will not create an economic base that challenges white supremacy. As long as you stay on the plantation known as the ghetto, like Pookie and Ray Ray, you are no threat to white supremacy, because you are under the submission of the black female. And that's another thing about the psychological ghetto that a lot of people don't understand, is that as a gynocentric state, it is designed to emasculate men and keep them dependent on women, so they won't challenge the power of the welfare state. As long as the black male is codependent on the female for his needs being met, he is no threat to white supremacy. And if he's out here doing the dirty work of white supremacy, killing other black men, he is doing white supremacy's job by eliminating competition for white supremacy for resources. So this Pookie and Ray Ray, basically, they are like chocolate Klansmen, and they are terrorizing their own community. And they do that because they want to keep you from competing for resources. They don't want you to compete for resources. They don't want you to go out here and do things. So these mentally damaged individuals, they do white supremacy's dirty work. And that's why they are a threat to every black man out here overall, because Pookie and Ray Ray, they are brainwashed and they don't really think. They don't really do anything except whatever the black woman wants to do, because they have not woken up to take the red pill. They have not woken up to see reality, and a lot of them want to stay on the welfare state, and they want to stay there doing white supremacy's dirty work because they are afraid to go out into the real world. That's why they stay in the physical ghetto, because they don't want to leave, because they're afraid they can't make it out in the real world. And that's why you have Pookie and Ray Ray. They're talking about being real in the streets because they don't want to go out into the real world. They'll sit there and say they're staying in the neighborhood to keep it real, but in actuality, it just shows how scared they actually are. And that's the whole deal with your Pookie and Ray Ray out here. They're afraid to go out. And again, that's all due to that psychological conditioning that comes in these single mother households. These single mother households teach these boys and these girls a culture of fear at an early age. And that fear is that if they even think about going to do anything, they will be punished by people, welfare caseworkers, Section 8 landlords, or people in the government programs like food stamps and WIC. If they go out and do something, they will be punished. And that's the great fear that has a lot of black people staying on the ghetto. Again, even if they go out here and get college degrees, because I've seen people go out here and get college degrees and they will still just stay in that ghetto neighborhood talking about how they're going to keep it real, how they're going to live ghetto fabulous. And this is with jobs that sometimes pay $50,000, $60,000, and $70,000 a year. They will stay in that place because they are afraid of taking that step forward, because that step forward means they have to be responsible for themselves. And when it comes down to females primarily, they don't want to be responsible for themselves. So they will stay on that ghetto plantation rather than take that step towards home ownership or going out to build that business, because they would rather stay on that ghetto plantation and still be under that welfare state slave master. So that's another part of the psychological ghetto. Your black female, she will sit there again and get these degrees and get this big time job, but she will never leave that project or that Section 8 apartment because she fears having to be responsible for herself. And she would rather have that male up under her and have him in her house, that so-called man in her house, rather than go out here and deal with a black man who will be the leader and authority over her, because she fears having that black man's leadership and authority, and she fears submitting to that male's leadership and authority. And that's something I talked about in my ebook, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, how black women, once they get their degrees in their job, they don't want to submit to black male authority because they fear that their whole economic state will wind up becoming disrupted because the black man's economic situation is never really stable. So they fear they fear submitting to that man because they fear that the entire economic base they have will wind up falling completely apart. And that's the one thing. That's why they don't want to submit to black men, and that's why they would rather stay on the welfare slave plantation rather than go out and have their own place or have a place with that black man, because they want to go out here and stay on the Section 8 plantation, getting those low rents and paying low electric bills and being able to have money to go out and buy clothes. So they rather have that rather than go out here and build with a black man. They would rather stay on that plantation than go out here and build with a black man. So that's another reason why they stay mentally on the ghetto and physically in the ghetto, is they fear being out on their own. And this is the mindset that so many black people have learned over the decades, is this mental dependence on this welfare state. And it's that mental dependence on the welfare state that has created this psychological ghetto. A ghetto we see manifested physically on the outside, but that foundation of that ghetto is based again on how people see themselves on the inside. And it's what they see on the inside we see reflected on the outside. And the only way to change the outside is for people to start thinking differently. And that's something that is very hard for a lot of black people to do, because a lot of black people are afraid to start thinking differently, because they believe if they start thinking differently, what will happen is there will be some sort of consequence. But no consequence can be worth the suffering that people have in the ghetto right now. As I started to see back in my 20s, I would rather go out here and deal with all of that hardship and have something of my own rather than stay up under these government people who will just keep you at the same level of bottom in order to continue getting resources at your expense. It was just worth it to just walk away from everything, because in order for this system to continue perpetuating itself, it needs bodies. But if the bodies walk away, the entire welfare state collapses and falls in on itself. It's similar to what the men going their own way are doing right now to the entire social structure of the bars, clubs, and restaurants. They just walked away, and now we have all these bars, clubs, and restaurants. They're all just falling in and going out of business because men no longer are spending money on women. And we have things like not only restaurants, but toy stores and all these jewelers. Because recently Jared and Kay said that they're closing stores. It's all because men got their mind right, and they decided that if they didn't play the game, they wouldn't lose. So once they did that, the entire paradigm changed. But because you have people who still buy into the whole ghetto mindset, that's why nothing changes in the black community. And that, again, has to do with the conditioning of the mind and the culture that black people have been taught for the last 50 years, because ghetto culture and ghetto thinking is a recent thing in the last 50 years. And that's something that a lot of people, they really don't understand, that the whole psychological ghetto started 50 years ago. It was not an ongoing thing. It was something that happened because our black women bought into the feminism, and because they bought into feminism, they bought into the white liberals' idea of them getting these resources and his welfare state. And because of that, they abandoned their fathers, the fathers of their children and their husbands, and they went to go live on that ghetto plantation. And that ghetto plantation undermined the entire Black culture by teaching Black children that they had to accept less than in order to get on a road to success. Unfortunately, that so-called road to success, where they took this pit stop to get these government benefits, only wound up leading to a lot of Black children growing up to become completely dysfunctional, because the entire psychological mindset that you learn in 18 years of the welfare state teaches you that you are inferior, it teaches you that you are less than, and it teaches you to accept less than the best. That's some of the things you learn in the psychological ghetto, is that you learn to see yourself as less than. You learn how to settle for less, because in the ghetto, everybody settles for less. And you learn not to go out here and try to excel at anything. And that if you try to excel at anything, you will be punished either by the overseers who oversee these welfare offices and these Section 8 offices and these WIC offices, or you will be punished by the overseers who will go out here in these gangs or these dope dealers. These people are also overseers in this welfare state plantation. And all they do is they all want to teach you this great fear that if you challenge the state, you will be punished. And that's why most of these ghettos remain in the state that they are. That's the reason why they become baby making factories. And that's why they become pipelines to prison, because it all starts with the fear that your Black women teach their sons and the fear that they teach their daughters. They teach them to fear the welfare state and to never go out and challenge this. And that's the thing that really messes up a lot of Black people and keeps them stuck in a psychological ghetto that prevents them from leaving the physical ghetto. Because the only way you can truly be free of the psychological ghetto is to, in order to be free of the physical ghetto is to break the psychological ghetto. Because once you break the psychological ghetto, then you will be free to go out and be the Black person you want to be and actualize the potential to be the Black person God wants you to be. And that's the thing that most Black people have to understand, is you have to break the conditioning and mindset of the welfare state, because that mindset that you learn from an early age is the thing that keeps you from moving your life forward. And it's that psychological ghetto that keeps you in where you are, and it keeps you afraid to go out and do what you need to do, because you'll have all these people telling you that you can't do things. And that's another part of the psychological ghetto, is everybody's always telling you you can't do anything, when in actuality, you've always had the power to do it. And you just don't want to do it because you fear social ostracization. And you also fear that you may lose resources, but you can't. But the whole thing is you have to take the risk, because the rewards are definitely worth it. And this is something Black people have to understand, is that sometimes you just have to walk away from something like the welfare state in order to have an intangible of higher value. And the intangibles that have higher value are your freedom and your ability to go out here and actualize your potential. And these are the things that you have to do. Face the facts. It is not hard to restructure your mind. It was something I was able to do ever since I was about 15, 16 years old. And after I turned about 15, 16 years old, and I saw the reality of the world around me, I managed to start changing my thinking, because I was in Park West High School and I got mugged on the train in 1989. And then I just woke up and saw the truth about the people around me and how they didn't want anything and how they didn't want to do anything. And I saw where they were going, and I decided to change my frame of thinking. And that's how I started my journey out of the psychological ghetto. And I started moving my life forward. So it is possible to restructure your thinking. It's possible to restructure your perspective of thinking, because I was a guy who grew up in the ghetto. I lived in the ghetto, and I began to take a look at that world and see it for what it was. And that's why I'm trying to talk to people about this right now, because I understand that you could be living in that ghetto. It's a psychological place. And if you don't get your mind right, you will wind up staying in that place, no matter how much education you get, no matter how many jobs you have. Because people, they think that they can leave the ghetto if they have this college degree or this job. But I've known people who have master's degrees and PhDs who are still in the ghetto, still participating in ghetto behavior. And those people, they are never actualizing their potential, because they become their own worst enemy, and they wind up sabotaging themselves before they can get God's blessings and achieve what God wants them to achieve, because they are so caught up in their own mind and their ideas about that they were told, that they never empower themselves and, take that power over their own life. Nightingale, Matilda was stuck in a psychological ghetto at one point. 1 second. If this is. Hello? It looks like there is. Oh, it's a solicitor. I'm sorry. Let me get back to Nightingale's point. He's talking about Matilda Crowley from my novel Spellbound. And yeah, she was stuck in a psychological ghetto at one point because she thought she had to fit into this black box that would be acceptable to white people. And she was trying to get out of that black box, which told her that a mulatto or a biracial person was destined to be on a road to tragedy. So the Matilda Crowley character, yes, she was stuck in a psychological ghetto at one point, but as the book progresses, she breaks out of the psychological ghetto and starts going down her own road in the goth subculture. And that's how she breaks out of the psychological ghetto. But yes, Matilda Crowley in Spellbound was stuck in a psychological ghetto, but she eventually broke out of it, and that's how she grew as a character. Now, that book, Spellbound, is a textbook example of how somebody can break out of a psychological ghetto. And I urge you to go pick up Spellbound. It's on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle. And it's a book that will show you how to get out of a place like the psychological ghetto. And it shows you examples of people who are stuck in the psychological ghetto. Well, John, that was a solicitor calling up, but that was because I don't have a girlfriend, so that was a solicitor. Yeah, that's true, Black Sand. The USA is responsible for making the black ghetto because they wanted to create a permanent black underclass, and they wanted to keep black people as an underclass so they could continue to make money at the expense of black people. So that was one of the things that they wanted to do. And when black people started going in with concepts like integration, was they wanted to keep black people at the bottom of the world, because if they had their freedom, they would be able to create their own economy. So the way to undermine the black economy was by getting the black woman to buy into this whole concept of the welfare state and have her dependent on the welfare state, because as long as the black woman was dependent on the welfare state, what would happen is she would teach that welfare culture and that welfare mindset to them. And as they learned that fear, they would go out here and do the dirty work for white supremacy, creating single mothers that would create more children for the welfare state. And they would have these beta black males out here who would either grow up to become codependent on women or go out here to kill other black men, either winding up dead or in prison, and eliminating white supremacy's own competition to their economic system, and with the black woman controlling the dollar being the person who would be out here from white corporations and white businesses, rather than going out here to go out and build our own businesses and operations. So that's one of the other things that the psychological ghetto did, was it created these consumers who would go out here and be no threat to the white economic system. And all those people, because they believe the white man's ice is colder, would be out here and buying white products instead of going out here to support black products and black-owned businesses. And that's how they undermine the black economy, because if you get the black man out of the home and you get the black household destroyed, when you take the father and the authority figure out, then you have a dependent class of people who can become a permanent underclass. So that's one of those things that was done. That's one of those things that was done overall, because if you get people thinking a certain way, they will just sit there and continue to think that way about being consumers and not producers. So we got another troll here I'm going to have to get rid of. They just pop in. But swatting, John Rules, what swatting is where somebody calls the police on somebody, and they did it to Peter Simeti when he was trying to talk about establishing standards for alternate comics, but it's done to people all the time, and it's done to harass and terrorize people who ever speak against certain narratives and certain ideas. I haven't seen Professor Gates' documentary on Reconstruction, but I don't really trust your Henry Louis Gates, because I believe he's going to do something to make black men look bad. No, you can leave Deviant on. Deviant Miles Mayhem, he's okay. But I'm going to try to get back to the psychological ghetto. And again, the book that Wednesday Nightingale Nightmare talked about, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. This book will give you a little bit of an insight into the psychological ghetto, because the Matilda Crowley character experienced the psychological ghetto and the stereotypes that they tried to put on her, and she realized that she didn't have to buy into those stereotypes. And that's something that I put in this story about the psychological ghetto in this book. So if you get this one, you're going to learn a little bit more about the psychological ghetto, because the psychological ghetto, one of the other parts of it is the stereotypes that they want you to buy in. And that's another part of the psychological ghetto, is once they get you to start thinking a certain way, what will happen is, okay, we got this Isaac Marcello who is trying to flood the board, and the psychological, and the whole thing is that they want you to buy into these stereotypes so that you can become easily identifiable to white supremacists. So what they want you to do after they teach you this culture of fear is teach you to adopt these identities and personas that will make you fit into white supremacy's smooth world. And that smooth world only functions if people follow the narratives and stereotypes white supremacists want them to follow. So whenever you see the hood rat, the baby mama, the thug, and the dusty Negro, they all fit within the boxes that white supremacists consider comfortable and consider acceptable personas to fit into their smooth world. And that's something that white supremacists want you to do in that when you go out here and become a part of the psychological ghetto, because you've been so mentally conditioned, you think this is the only acceptable way to be black. And this is something, again, I talked about in Spellbound. People want to put on these personas like the hood rat, like the thug, like the ghetto Negro, and they want you to put those personas on because these are the personas are fitting into the box that is considered acceptable by white people and considered acceptable to white people. So they want you to fit into those boxes so their world can be smooth and their world has nobody to be a problem or an obstacle to white people or somebody who could challenge white people. And with the Matilda Crowley character in the book, she thinks she has to, because she's a biracial woman, she has to fit into that tragic mulatto box. But then as the book progresses, she realizes that she can break free of that stereotype and become the person she wants to become. Let me see. I don't know about Latia's message, but she's saying I'm coming across as racist when I'm not coming across as racist. When it comes down to black people, they have been put into this box that is considered acceptable by white people. And when you're trying to distance yourself from I'm trying to get people to be free to be who they want to be. And that's what she's saying. I'm coming across as racist, but I'm not coming across as racist. What's racist is black people fitting into that box and trying to do what white people consider to be accepted and not trying to find what is acceptable to themselves. And what I talked about in Spellbound is the darker shade of black, where we define our own blackness and define our own standard for blackness. And I'm looking at this whole thing and I'm saying that it's not a racist thing. How is it racist for me to talk about black people breaking out of a box and leave a ghetto? Because the only way you can leave that ghetto again is to change your frame of thinking. Once you change your frame of thinking and you leave the psychological ghetto, then they can go out here and leave the physical ghetto. I told them not to block you, Devian. You've been with me for a long time, but we've had a problem with these racist trolls who have been coming in here, and they have made this live stream they have been a problem this time. She asked a question that said I was a racist, but there was nothing racist about anything I said at all. All I said was the whole thing is that how is it racist when a black person, asks other black people to walk away from a ghetto, a place that was created to contain black people, and it was created to keep black people from actualizing their potential. And that was the big problem that she had a problem with. And it's like, how are black people racist when black people do not control the economy anymore and we don't control the politics anymore? And that's where people get the mistake where they talk about I'm being a racist, but black people don't control businesses, black people don't control infrastructure, black people don't control any of the institutions, and that is due to the welfare state and the welfare state reinforcing the psychological ghetto. So that's something they don't understand. They sit there and say, oh, black people are racist, but how can black people be racist when we don't have control any sort of policies or resources overall? That's true, Ra. Um, the spell over their eyes is strong. They can't see the truth. But when you try to talk about truth, that's when they start getting upset regarding things like the psychological ghetto, something a lot of black people are stuck in, and even I say some white people are stuck in, and non-black people are stuck in, because the psychological ghetto is again, it's a mental place that manifests itself in your head that reflects the world around you. So psychological ghetto, we can see that right now, because when you start to challenge the ideas of the psychological ghetto, this is where you get the trolls getting really upset, because this is the first time I've actually ever seen a live stream, where you see all of these racists coming out in full force. So that's very interesting to me, that you have all of these. Oh, Ophidian's okay. He's good. Leave him alone. Where you see all of this, this guy, the Omega guy. Yeah, you see all these racists coming out, and the reason why they're coming out is because I'm presenting facts that refute the ideas regarding their smooth world. So, Cheyenne asks a good question. Universal basic income is actually going to create a deeper ghetto mindset in people. So universal basic income, that is just another form of welfare, which is another form of slavery. So people think universal basic income will improve the quality of life, but as someone who's grown up on welfare, I can tell you that universal basic income will create the same dependence and codependent mindset that we have in the ghetto right now. Because once you take a man's ability to be responsible for himself away from himself, what happens is he has no incentive to do better, and he has no effort, no willingness to go out and do better for himself or improve his quality of life. Kitty asks a very good question. How profitable is it to have people in the hood? It's not really profitable, because the only person who profits from having people in the hood is the owners of the welfare state, the politicians and the foreign business owners. They're the only people who profit. So the whole thing is that the whole group is being taken advantage of and exploited, and it's basically a plantation. So having black people in the hood doesn't really help anything. In fact, all it does is create people like in the Matrix. They're batteries that get used up and then eventually discarded by the state. So I have to disagree with you, Stephen. Not anybody can be racist. When it comes down to black people, we don't have the power to discriminate against anyone economically or politically. So when it comes down to black people, they don't have that power. So we can't go out here and just deny anybody an opportunity to get a job. We can't deny anybody an opportunity at a vote. We can't deny anybody opportunities. So we don't have any sort of power. So you can't tell a black person cannot, change an election. They cannot decide who gets on the ballot. We don't control those type of things. So how can we be racist? How can we discriminate when we are not being given choices? We are having choices being given to us. So when it comes down to most black people, these left politicians come to us. We don't go to them. And they come to us and they tell us who to vote for. We don't tell them who to vote for, and we don't tell them what policies we want on the ballot. And that's something people don't really understand about black people as it relates to racism. And because they think that, we have power, but we do have power. We just haven't learned how to actualize it, because so many of us are so caught up in this psychological ghetto. we think we have to take what people give us instead of demanding what we want and going for what we want. And again, that's all due to the fear we have learned. And the fear we have learned in the ghetto, and about fearing losing these government benefits, fearing being put out of this Section 8 housing, and fear that we will wind up losing things overall. Looks like we have another troll talking about my opinion on fat shaming when that's not even the subject of this entire discussion. Oh, the trolls are coming out today, and sadly, they are coming out because, again, I'm talking about topics that make them uncomfortable, and I'm presenting arguments that about this ghetto that make them uneasy. Because when I sit here and I talk about this ghetto, again, I'm not just talking from just some research point. I'm coming from somebody who has actually lived in the ghetto for over 45 years, and someone who has lived here knows the practices and processes of this ghetto and how it's designed to keep people oppressed. The whole thing with the ghetto is, again, it's about keeping your mind messed up so that you will still have this dependent mindset. Even if you get things like education and employment, you are still afraid to go out here and do what needs to be done for yourself and be able to go out here and work hard for what you want to work for. Because what they want to do is keep you dependent on this welfare state in some way, shape, or form, whether it be about whether it be you staying in their Section 8 housing, you staying on their welfare programs, you staying on their food stamps. They want to keep you under their control. And if they can keep you under their control, they can continue to get resources at your expense, whether it be these leftist politicians who want these block grants or these Section 8 landlords who go out here and get their money from you. So that's why they want to keep you on the plantation, because they are making money at your expense, and they don't want you to make that money for yourself. And if your mind isn't right, they will continue to still keep making money at your expense. And it seems, again, this is a topic that it must really hurt a lot of these people. Kitty Candy asks a good question: is Planned Parenthood another branch of this? Yeah, they want some of the people to abort children because they get money off it too. But the whole thing is they still want people to reproduce, but the whole thing is they only want a certain number of people to reproduce. But also the whole thing is that they don't want the black race to move forward. So if you can't control, the whole thing is if they can control everything, you don't control everything. And that's the whole thing with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was always hated black people as a thing designed to destroy black people. And again, they don't want there to be too many black children, because if there are too many, then they have a problem because they can't spend, they have to spend more money on them. So they want a certain type of black person to reproduce so they can continue to make money off those people. Thank you, Pro Man. One for that one. But the whole thing is that the welfare state, again, it's designed to bring you to start thinking about things like aborting children, because they don't want you to think about having a healthy family. They just want you to start, because you started at 14, 15 thinking about aborting children, you'll keep doing it. And the whole thing is you'll think that that's the easy way out of a unwanted pregnancy, instead of you understanding that you need to be responsible with your body and you need to value your body as a temple of God. That was something that your pastor won't teach you, because also in the ghetto, you have the black pastor who teaches a form of religion that sounds like the word of God, but is not the word of God. He will sit there and go along with things that are diametrically opposed to everything in his own Bible. So he'll sit there and he'll go along with abortion, even though the Bible itself says fornication is a sin, and that if you are out here committing an act of fornication, but a follower of God is going to tell you fornication creates children, and you shouldn't be fornicating in that first place, because the only sex you're supposed to have is the sex you have when you're married. So that is something most people, they can't connect the dots on, because they'll sit there and they'll talk about, abortion kills children, but the fornication is the thing that creates the children. So Cheyenne Chan makes a good point. Yeah, because if you reproduce, it costs the welfare state money. And right now, yeah, they are trying to limit the population growth because they have more people than what they need in the welfare state. And that's one of those things that they want to do, is limit that population, because they've made as much money as they want, and they don't want any more to be made. So they're trying to use what they have right now. But the whole thing is they want to keep black people on that plantation, so they will go out here and stay on the welfare state that makes money for those liberals to a point. They only want a certain amount of them out here, and that's what they want overall. Oh, the trolls are out for this one. I mean, this one, if I talked about comic books, I doubt I would have this many trolls on here. I mean, I'm going to take a minute. Okay. And where were these? Okay, I'm going to leave a link to my Indiegogo in the chat. So if you want to donate to the Indiegogo for the first comic book for the I'm trying to produce, you can donate to that. But again, but it seems like everybody's here for this one, but nobody was there for any of the other ones. Now, when I do comic book live streams, you can't find these people, but for this one, they're here because they can't stand hearing these raw facts that I'm presenting regarding the whole psychological ghetto, a place that it seems like that not only are black people stuck in, but a lot of white people are stuck in as well, because when it comes down to white people, they need their smooth world. And that's why they are trolling this live stream so hard, is because their whole smooth world is being disrupted by the raw facts that I am presenting in this live stream, where I'm telling people the truth about how this ghetto is a place that is mental, and they need to keep black people in that mental place so they won't go out into the world and actualize their potential. Because if black people go out here and actualize their potential, what's going to happen is they're going to be competing with them. Noob, yes, all my books are appropriate for teenagers. I wrote Spellbound for teenagers, Noob, so you can get this book for a teenager and have no problem with them reading it, or any of the books in the SJS Direct imprint. So a lot of these trolls, they don't like hearing these truths because it's just too raw, it's too hard of a fact for them, regarding the psychological ghetto. They want black people to stay on the psychological ghetto because they are, as long as black people stay on the ghetto, then what will happen is you will just wind up being no threat to anyone, and then people can use you as the tool to do their dirty work. So that's why they can't handle these raw facts that I'm presenting right here in this live stream, where I'm breaking down. No, you don't have to delete Smiley Man. He's all right. They can't handle it, so that's why they're getting all upset. Because when you have this ghetto mindset, all you're thinking about is 40 ounces, getting lit, getting women, and creating illegitimate children. And when you're doing that, that's where the racists are comfortable, because you are fitting into the box that makes them acceptable to white people, and it makes you acceptable to white people's ideas about black people. So this is the big problem. This is why they have such a problem with any black man speaking raw truth. They can't stand the idea of it, because it just makes them uncomfortable hearing that someone is not worshiping white people, and somebody does not see them as a god, but sees them as just another person. And that really terrifies a lot of white people, that you're not sitting here worshiping white people, trying to play these cop character roles and fit into the black box that's acceptable to white people. So that's why they want to keep you in that psychological ghetto, drinking 40 ounces, wearing Jordan shoes, smoking Black and Milds, and talking about being real, when in actuality, all you're doing is perpetuating a stereotype. Yeah, it does terrify other black people, Supremo. It terrifies them, because when they realize that they'll have to take responsibility for themselves, and it means that black people are not going to follow lockstep in that ragdoll dance, spellbound, trying to fit into that box and stay on that black plantation. So it terrifies a good group of people, these white racists, and many of these thugs, many of these hood rats, many of these people who are still taking the blue pill and are staying on the welfare state. It truly terrifies them hearing about the psychological ghetto, and it terrifies them because it challenges every idea in their mind, and it challenges every perception they have been taught from birth to, and the ideas and reality. And when you challenge someone's ideas of reality, it really makes them extreme. It makes them really lose it. So, but that's what they want. That's why they're so uncomfortable with the idea. So I'm going to try not to entertain them. What I'm going to do is, again, my understanding of the psychological ghetto came from, again, in my 20s, and that's where I started to get inspired to write the novel The Changing Soul, a book I tried to sell, but then now that I finally realized there was a reason why I couldn't sell that one, was because to trade publishers, because that one didn't fit the narrative of mainstream publishers, and that was all because the story did not fit the narrative that they wanted, because the publishing industry is controlled by feminists, and it is controlled primarily by white women who want to continue teaching that culture of dependency and slavery on black children in the publishing industry. So they didn't like that idea. The book I was doing, Changing Soul, which was about breaking free of that vicious cycle of the psychological ghetto, seeing people as toxic, and then moving on with your life. No, you don't have to time out Kitty. She's okay. She's okay. And her she's okay. But I may wrap this one up early because it's just getting a little too crazy. Yeah, I may wrap this one up in about 5 or 10 minutes because this one, it seems to have brought out all the crazy people, and they can't handle these raw facts that I'm breaking down for everybody regarding this psychological ghetto and the idea and the whole concept of a psychological ghetto, because a physical ghetto is a place where you have people who, it's not a physical place, it's a psychological place. And again, it's really sad that I have to wrap this one up, but I'm gonna wrap this one up early, and I may do another Friday night one, but that may be a completely different topic. But it's just I'm just trying to let everybody know about the psychological ghetto, because the psychological ghetto, again, comes from people learning a dysfunctional frame of thinking. And it's that frame of thinking that keeps them from actualizing their potential. And it's that frame of thinking that keeps people from moving forward. So when you have a person who's living in the ghetto, what happens is what's keeping them in this ghetto is their way of thinking. And it's that psychological ghetto that prevents them from moving their lives forward. And that's why people who stay in the ghetto never leave, because their minds are messed up. And even if they move, they still stay in the ghetto, because even in the neighborhood I'm in now, it's a very nice place to live, but we got some ghetto folks here who still have not gotten out of the ghetto mindset. They're still playing radios loud. They're still doing dumb stuff. And again, that's all due to the ghetto thinking that they have and the ghetto mindset that they haven't broken out of. But once you break out of the ghetto, that's when the psychological ghetto, that's when you start creating your own standard for yourself, and you start setting goals for what you want to do for yourself. And that's what you do when you break out of the psychological ghetto. It's just like what Matilda Crowley did in Spellbound, where Matilda Crowley broke out of the psychological ghetto, broke away from the stereotypes of the psychological ghetto, and became a part of the goth subculture, and became her own person, and started setting her own path to establish her own blackness. So if you want to learn more about the psychological ghetto, I urge you to pick up Spellbound, and I urge you to pick up the other books in the Spinsterella trilogy. And if you want to learn more about ways to move your life forward, you can pick up any of my other positive African-American fiction on Amazon.com in paperback and ebook. And I'm going to wrap this live stream up, and I'm going to do another one on Friday, but I'm going to work on what topic that one's going to be. That one, I'm still thinking about it, but I'm going to wrap this one up. I thank you for being a part of this live stream, and I thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about the psychological ghetto.